Let's start. I love happy. I love being happy. Who loves to be happy? Who wants to be happy? So for me, happiness is automating everything. Well, almost automating everything. Because one thing that I noticed is if you don't automate things, companies start building guidelines. You know, there's a 15 checkpoint list how to deploy something, which can be just replaced with a small shell script. If you come to a new team where things are not automated, I felt sad. Sometimes even completely confused. Like, what's happening here? In my previous team, I deployed to production a change on my first day in. One company. In other teams, it would usually take like a week or two. It was a small feature, but it was a goal to have something on production the first day. Because everything was automated, so my life was easy. I just came up in the morning, set up everything, and started working. I didn't have to be scared trying to figure out what are the software that I need to set up on my laptop. What's the data? What's the password? Where's the repo? I like being fast. I don't like being crazy fast. Okay? I'm not trying to be reckless. And automation is actually about speed. But in my case, it's about reliability and repeatability. Because if I don't have to think about something, I just know that there's a one-liner that does it, it makes my life much easier. And we can be happy. But as a team, happy. So, can we automate migrations and fixtures? My name is Miro Svrtan. If you're interested, you can find me on Twitter using this handle. So, what are migrations? There are different types of migrations. You might have server migrations where you're moving from server A to server B, data center A to data center B, provider A to provider B. This talk is not about that. Maybe you want to move from database vendor A to database vendor B. How to do that? Sorry, this talk is not about that. But how our app evolves can be codified. Our schemas can be codified so that if our database looked like this yesterday, we know how it will look tomorrow. And I'm not talking about having pictures of it. Especially when your system goes crazy. I think this is Drupal or Magento. I'm not sure which one. Okay, so somebody said it's too small to be Magento. But a lot of our projects go haywire like this. So, who here uses Symfony? Okay, who here uses Laravel? Okay, so Laravel, by using Active Record, has a different setup of thinking of models and data schemas than Symfony. Well, when I say Symfony, I mean Doctrine. So, if we look at Doctrine, there's a model, there's your user entity, there's a conference entity, there's a product entity, there's a database schema, okay, how the database looks currently. And if we want to create a migration in Doctrine, we try to calculate the differences by looking at the model, looking at the current database, and then creating a migration file. So, just for you to understand, model is the source of truth. which means that if you manually add another table to your database, if you run migrations, it will say, drop that database, drop that table. Because the source of truth are the entities. So it's just pure PHP. Nothing more, nothing less. It's just a class. Okay? And this is just an SQL. I guess most of you know SQL, which means that if I create a migration and we have a peer review, you can easily read what are the exact changes that I'm going to do on production with this. I'm going to create a table and I'm going to add a unique index on it. So how do we actually run those migrations? So in our code, we have file named version 1, file named version 2. There's a table in the database called migrations that has a record for version 1. So the runner will look, are there any new migrations in the code? Yes, there is a migration version 2, sorry. Let's run it and let's mark it as run. By marking as run, I mean it will be added to that table as version 2 was ran on this system. Which means if I, by mistake, run the migration again, like twice in a row, the second one will say, oh, I'm done. There's nothing to do. The migration has changed. Which means we cannot reuse existing migrations. Okay? So if you deployed migration version 1 to production and you change whatever you do on your project in it, it will never run on production. Okay? You have to add new migrations. But we can also revert them or roll back. So if we added a table or if we added a column, we need to go back as well, which means drop the table, drop the column. Or if we want to drop the column, the reverse is creating a column. Of course, you will lose the data in that process, but yeah. I actually suggest to never roll back. Just move forward. Okay? And people tend to be reluctant around that idea because what if we deployed something to production that has a bug and we need to roll it back? What I usually do is I deploy the migrations before the feature. So if I screwed up something, I can roll back the feature without changing the database. That's easy. I don't have to handle what's going to happen in those 3 milliseconds or 3 seconds between adding something to the database and the new code running versus the old one. I lied about versioning. It's not version 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It actually uses date time. Why? Because if different teams work on same projects and they want to add new migration, and they look, oh, last one was version 3, so let's add version 4, you're probably going to get 2 version 4s. On the other hand, what's the chance that 2 people will generate new migration at this exact second? Like, probably not going to happen that often, if ever. But it comes with a punch. For some people, this might be an issue. For some, not. So Doctrine is tied to the vendor. So, for instance, I'm using here Postgres. So if we decide to switch our app to MySQL, we have to go delete all of the migrations and just create a new one. Because they're specific to the platform that you're building for. Which also means that if you're using SQLite for your tests, you cannot use migrations as well, because you have built them for another system. I don't find the SQLite as much of a problem, because as long as I can run this on my local machine, I'm fine. I can for tests, just run schema update or something similar because I don't care about those details. But on the other hand, locally, I can see that everything works by creating migrations, running migrations, and everything else. Laravel has a different perspective on it. As there's no real mapping between the entities and the database, they have their own DSL on how to create the schema migration. It's rather simple. Create a table called users that has auto-incremented ID, column with named name, that's type of string, and that's it. It has rollback as well, which means it's platform independent. It can run on any system because there's a different language between the SQL and the code that you're writing. I don't personally like this proposition. I worked with some other active record systems as well in other languages, and to me this is the biggest pain point, because you have to remember to create a schema in a language that you're not familiar with, because it's not in the language of the, it's not in the programming language, it's their own DSL. So you have to learn another language. So how do we deploy that migrations? So, is anybody using FTP to production, to deploy? Okay, so, okay, I saw that hand, Derek. The good thing, he doesn't do PHP, so I'm fine, I'm happy. So most of us have some automated system. Maybe it's Capistrano, maybe it's PHP deployer, maybe it's something else. So how they usually work is you deploy, you have a folder with your current app, you deploy it into a new folder, you do all of the tasks that you need, and then you switch folders. Is it as a symlink, soft link, or something else? But you switch the apps. So everything you have to do into your deployment procedure is just before the switch, say, Doctrine migrations run, Laravel migrations run, or Eloquent, I'm not sure. And that's it. It's gonna happen on every deploy of yours. Some people are concerned about how to deploy on large datasets, because usually automated deployment systems have like a 60-second or 90-second timeout. And sometimes if you're changing a gigantic table, it might take a few minutes to add a column, add an index or something. So what we used to do is we would create the migration, talk to our ops, and tell them, hey, here's a pull request. Can you deploy this in production when you feel everything's okay? Because remember, I'm pushing my database changes in front of my feature. So I'm still working on my feature, so I don't mind if somebody does it tomorrow or later today or something. And what would ops do is run the query and mark it manually in that table, migration table, that it's run. When they would call me back and say, hey, that's done, I just merge it to master and it gets deployed. Actually, nothing gets deployed except the new migration file that's already ran, so nothing has changed, and everything's fine. But if we start dropping the database all the time because we're doing so many changes, are we really gonna fill it up every time we start from scratch? There's a new person coming into the team or something. Who here has loaded production dumps for local development? Okay. Who here loves creating lorem ipsums for your local development? How would you feel if you come to a new team and they tell you, yeah, just go to the database, create some user, and then add some products and some categories that you think are okay? Or somebody ships you a SQL dump of their database, but they have an older dump because they're working on some feature that's been there for like 6 months, so they don't have a newer dump. So you have the changes in the structure, but you don't have changes in the data, as in local development. That's where fixtures come in. The idea is to have dummy data instead of production data. Everybody loves production data, except when it becomes like few gigabytes, few tens of gigabytes, or a few hundred gigabytes, which is something that happened to me. Our loading time came to be full night. After I left that company, I heard that they would start at 5 p.m. loading the local server, not local laptop, local server, and sometimes it would be finished by 9 a.m. next morning, which is pretty crappy. So why don't we codify the data that we use? We can even communicate about that data. So, again, it's just a PHP file. Create a user, set an ID, set username, set email. Another user, save it to our database. So now, when a new person comes into the team, or there have been changes in the application that you were not involved into, you can drop the whole database, create it again, and have all of that data back in seconds. Literally in seconds. If you need a lot of data to see if pagination works, you can easily just do a for loop and create a whole bunch of records. I don't suggest using that in general purpose, okay? For like, hey, why don't we have user 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to 77, okay? We should be communicating the data. What do I mean by that? So, let's say that we're building an app to organize conferences, okay? And we have a conference entity with phpday 2019 that's happening on 10th and 11th May of 2019 in Verona, Italy, okay? Everybody understands the data. Who understands conf1, today, tomorrow, in city 1, country 1? So it's really important because I can more easily communicate, hey, I found a bug in some part of the system. Can you look at it? You can try it out by using Alex on phpday conference. Because I noticed that bug in that case. And the other developers just go and look at that case. Not user 75 on conference 32. This is the scary part. So just a short prayer. Sorry, I broke something. What? Yes, not on stage, right? Because... Okay, is everybody seeing my screen? Is it, let's say, readable? So, I'm going to use a small Symfony project just to show it off. Nothing really specific. So, for those of you that have not worked with Symfony ever, maybe you're coming from Laravel or another framework, in Symfony or in Doctrine, you define the properties, and by using either annotations, YAML, or XML, you can define what those types are. Here, I just used annotations for the sake of easy reading. Okay, so we have a column that's an integer. We have username that's a string of 20 characters. Okay. I just created the user fixture that says admin ID is 1, username is admin, just persisted. Okay? But I actually haven't created a migration. So I've created the code, but my database is empty. And I have, oh, this actually works, nice. Doctrine, migration, diff. What Doctrine did is created new migration file saying let's create table user with 2 columns. Okay? I was cleaning up projects to be able to. It migrated my local database. Let's open a user and add first name. Let's create a new migration. That adds the first name in. But let's now run it again, the different diff. It added another migration that's adding the first name in. And this is a rather common mistake. I did create the migration file, but I have not run it. So if you run the diff twice, it will create 2 different migrations trying to do the same thing. Okay? It's a common error. It happens. Don't worry. The system will tell you you can easily delete. You can even delete both of them and generate them again. Because maybe in the first one you added just 1 column and in the second you added the first and the second. You can freely just delete the files, run the migrations and everything from scratch, and then say, hey, diff, now create another one. Okay? But this seems to be a lot of work for some changes. So I actually have a Makefile. Damn, sorry. Which drops my current database, creates the database, runs all of the migrations to create my schema, and runs the fixtures. So usually this takes like milliseconds, but running Docker on a Mac is not the quickest thing ever. So it complained because I didn't delete the other one. Yeah. So what actually happened is I forgot to update my fixtures as well, because I added new column that needs some data in. It's done. So what now happened is, as I'm developing features, I create a table with two columns, and then have another migration to add the third column. And then as I kept working, I added fourth column, fifth column, sixth column, new table, and stuff like that. So I really don't want that. I want to have one migration for it. I'll just run the refresh. It's going to complain that there are no migrations to run, but that's an edge case because it's a start of a project. Okay. I run a diff. I run everything again. Now have all of the changes from my feature as one migration. So I feel comfortable working on the feature, just adding new properties, adding new entities, adding new tables, adding new data. Until I'm done, then I can just delete all of them and say, hey, let's just create one of them. Let's add a conference. Let's add it so it's actually visible on the screen. Table should be conferences. Name. Year. Let's create new migration. So this really usually goes in milliseconds, not seconds. But it at least gives me an option to like rest a bit from talking. Okay. Now we just added conferences. Let's add fixtures. Fixtures. Conference fixtures, new conference, phpday. Name. It's there. So now we can even interact between them. So let's say we want to add, let's add city. Cities. City. And name is going to be okay. Create the migration. city fixtures. Fixtures. I don't want to complicate it too much, sorry. So, if you noticed, I've been setting a reference. This is just a string, so you can use them in different fixtures because phpday is happening in Verona. And one setting is not in the same file as the other one, so I need to reference them somehow. Okay? So I'm going to set Verona as a reference. And I'm going to cheat here a bit. Because otherwise I have to go to Doctrine, many to 1. City. And in conference, I have to add Verona. City is this get reference, city, Verona. Let's see if this will work. Let's first create a migration. What did I forget? Oh, I forgot ORM. So now phpday is in Verona. I can reuse data from different fixtures and connect them by getting the reference. By just pure mistake, this worked. Because city fixtures is alphabetically before conference fixtures. So fixtures actually support saying, hey, there's an order in which to run them because you cannot reference an object that has not been set. So for instance, in conference fixtures, I cannot use a reference from user because it's not set by now. But what you can do is have them dependent in between. Extends, implements dependent fixture interface, and then say return city fixtures. So this is actually not going to change anything. So I don't need it, but I'm going to change it and say that user fixtures are also needed. And actually, it loaded city and user before the conferences. So I can create pretty complex data setup without having like a dump.sql, dump year.sql, dump that day SQL, and we can update and use it around. Thank you.